The sun was beating down on the pavement with a relentless, unforgiving heat. It was one of those afternoons in Los Angeles where the air feels thick and sticky, making it hard to breathe. Inside the patrol car, the air conditioning was humming, but it wasn't doing much to fight against the temperature outside. Officer David Carter sat behind the wheel, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He had been on the shift for 6 hours, and his back was starting to ache against the hard seat. David wasn't a bad man, but he was a tired man. At 45 years old, he had seen too much of the city's darker side. The shouting matches, the domestic disputes, the endless traffic stops. It all blended together into a gray fog in his mind. Today, that fog felt heavier than usual. His phone, sitting in the cup holder, had lit up 3 times in the last hour. Each time, it was a notification from the bank. He knew what they were without looking. Overdue notices. The mortgage was late again. He kept telling himself he would pick up an extra shift, that he would figure out, but the fatigue was winning. He turned the corner onto a quieter street, lined with tall trees that offered a patch of shade. He just wanted a moment of quiet. He reached for his water bottle, his eyes drifting away from the road for just a second. He was thinking about the argument he had with his daughter that morning. She needed money for a school trip, and he had snapped at her, telling her he didn't have it. The look on her face had crushed him. He was distracted, his mind miles away from the intersection he was approaching. Up ahead, a stop sign stood on the corner. It was a 4-way stop, a place where people usually rolled through slowly if no one was around. David didn't see any other cars moving. He didn't see pedestrians. He just saw the open road ahead and wanted to get to the next convenience store to buy a cold coffee and clear his head. He didn't even touch the brake pedal hard enough to make the car fully stop. He just rolled through. The impact happened so fast that it didn't seem real at first. There was a loud, sickening crunch, a sound of metal crushing against metal that vibrated through the steering wheel and into David's hands. The patrol car jerked forward, the tires screeching slightly on the hot asphalt. David's heart jumped into his throat. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the cruiser to a halt a few feet past the intersection. For a second, he just sat there, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. No, 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 he whispered to himself. His chest felt tight. This was it. This was the breaking point. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands, and put the car in park. He checked his mirror. No one was behind him. He had to get out and assess the damage. David pushed open the door of the cruiser. The heat hit him instantly, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. He stepped onto the street and looked at the front of his car. The bumper was scraped and the headlight was cracked, but it was what he saw to his right that made his stomach drop. There, parked innocently on the side of the road, was a vintage Porsche. It was a beautiful, classic car, dark silver in color. Now, the back driver's side panel was crumpled like a piece of paper. The rear bumper was hanging loose. David felt the blood drain from his face. He knew what kind of car that was. He knew it cost more than he made in 2 years. He looked around, praying the owner wasn't watching, but knowing he had to take responsibility. He was a police officer, after all. He couldn't drive away from this. Then, he saw a man stepping out from a nearby building. The man had been sitting on the steps, maybe enjoying the shade, or maybe he had just walked out of a coffee shop. He stood up and walked toward the car. He wasn't running. He wasn't screaming. He was just walking calmly. David swallowed hard. He adjusted his utility belt, feeling the weight of his gun and badge, which suddenly felt very heavy. He started walking toward the man, his notebook in hand, ready to apologize, ready to take the blame, but terrified of the reaction. People loved their cars, especially expensive ones, and people hated it when cops made mistakes. "Sir," David started, his voice sounding weak and raspy. "I am so sorry. I didn't see you there. I take full responsibility." The man turned around to face him. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and a worn-out leather jacket. He had a beard and messy dark hair. When he turned, David stopped in his tracks. The face looking back at him was one he had seen 1,000 times on movie posters and television screens. It was Keanu Reeves. David stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. It wasn't just that he was a celebrity. It was who he was. Everyone knew the stories about Keanu Reeves. The internet loved him. He was the internet's boyfriend, the guy who gave up a seat on the subway, the guy who was kind to everyone. And David, a stressed-out, indebted police officer, had just smashed into his car. Mr. Reeves, David stammered, feeling his face burn with embarrassment. I rolled that stop sign. It was completely my fault. I was distracted. I am so sorry. He expected the actor to be angry. He expected him to yell, or at the very least, to demand a supervisor. He expected a lecture on safety. In David's experience, when people in this city had their property damaged, the first thing they wanted was justice, and the second thing they wanted was someone to blame. But Keanu didn't yell. He didn't even look at the car yet. He looked at David. He studied David's face with calm, quiet intensity. He took a step closer, ignoring the crunch of broken glass under his boots. "Hey," Keanu said softly. His voice was low and gentle. "Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself?" David blinked. He wasn't prepared for that. I'm fine, sir. I'm just embarrassed. I can't believe I did this." "It happens," Keanu said with a slight shrug. He finally turned to look at his Porsche. He walked over to the crumpled bumper and looked at the dent. He didn't gasp. He didn't cry. He just looked at it, tilting his head to the side. "Well, she's seen better days. But it's just metal, right? It can be fixed." David walked up beside him, pulling out his ticket book. "I need to file a report. I need to give you my information. My insurance will cover it. It might take some time, but I promise I will handle it." Keanu turned back to him. He looked at David's uniform, then at his eyes. He seemed to notice something there, the dark circles, the stress, the way David's hands were still shaking slightly. It was as if Keanu could see the weight David was carrying, the argument with his daughter, the bills, the fatigue. "You look like you've had a really long day, officer," Keanu said. David was taken aback. Yeah, it's been a rough week." "We all have those," Keanu nodded. "Let's just exchange info and get this sorted out. No need to stress about it. Accidents happen. It's just a car." For the next few minutes, they stood on the sidewalk under the bright sun. David wrote down the details, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote. Keanu waited patiently, sipping from a water bottle he had brought with him. He didn't take out his phone to record the cop. He didn't call his lawyer. He just stood there, looking at the trees and the sky. When David handed him the paper, he felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you," David said, "for being so understanding. Most people will be screaming at me right now." Keanu took the paper and folded it neatly, putting it in his pocket. He looked at David one last time. "We're all just people driving around, trying to get somewhere. Sometimes we crash. It's how we handle it afterwards that matters. Take care of yourself, okay?" "I will," David promised. "And I'm sorry again." "Drive safe," Keanu said. David walked back to his cruiser. He got inside and sat down for a moment. The air conditioner was still running, but he felt cold now. He looked in the rearview mirror. Keanu was already on his phone, likely calling a tow truck or a mechanic, looking perfectly calm. David put the car in gear. As he pulled away from the curb, he felt a strange mix of emotions. He was still scared about the insurance costs, and he was still angry at himself for the mistake. But running underneath all that fear and shame was a strange sense of awe. He had messed up. He had done something wrong. And instead of punishment, he had been given kindness. He had been seen, not as a cop or a problem, but as a human being who was having a bad day. He drove down the street, the sun still shining bright, but the heavy fog in his mind felt just a little bit lighter. He didn't know it yet, but this day was far from over. The accident was just a beginning. The silence inside the patrol car was heavy, much heavier than the sound of the crash had been. David drove away from the scene, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his fingers ached. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the street, but David didn't notice the scenery. His mind was replaying the last 20 minutes on an endless loop. He saw the crumpled bumper of the Porsche. He saw the dust on Keanu Reeves' jacket. But mostly he heard the actor's voice. "Are you okay?" It didn't make sense to him. In David's world, people were angry. When he pulled someone over for speeding, they yelled. When he knocked on a door to break bad news, People screamed in grief or blamed him for the message. The city was hard, and the people in it were harder. But Keanu had been different. He had been soft. And that kindness was terrifying David more than any angry shout ever could. He headed back toward the police station. The drive usually took him 15 minutes. But today the traffic seemed to move at a snail's pace. Every red light felt like a punishment. At one stoplight, a group of tourists recognized a police cruiser and pointed their phones at him, snapping pictures. David shrank in his seat. He felt like a fraud. If they only knew what he had just done. If they only knew that the guy they all loved on the big screen was currently waiting for a tow truck. Because of him, when he finally arrived at the station, the parking lot was filling up with shift change vehicles. David parked in his designated spot and sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. He knew he had to go inside and file the accident report. It was standard procedure. But this wasn't a standard collision. Hitting a parked car was embarrassing enough. Hitting a movie star's car was a nightmare. He took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out. The air had cooled down slightly, but the humidity still clung to his uniform shirt. He walked into the station, the familiar smell of coffee and floor polish hitting him. Usually, this smell felt like safety, like home. Today, it felt like he was walking into a courtroom. He walked past a front desk where a young officer was typing away. David kept his head down, not wanting to make eye contact. He went straight to the sergeant's office. Sergeant Miller was sitting at his desk, buried under a stack of paperwork. David knocked on the open door frame. "Come in," Miller grunted. Not looking up, David stepped inside, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sarge, I need to file a report. I had a collision while on patrol." Miller looked up, adjusting his glasses. "You hurt?" "No, sir. I'm fine. It was a low-speed impact. I hit a parked car." Miller sighed, pulling a fresh form from his drawer. "Was a citizen's car? Do we need to call a tow truck for them?" David hesitated. He felt his face getting hot. It was a Porsche, sir. A vintage one." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. It belonged to Keanu Reeves. Sergeant Miller stopped writing. He looked over his glasses, his eyes wide. "Keanu Reeves? The actor?" "Yes, sir." Miller leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He rubbed his chin. "Well, that's a mess. Did he get your badge number? Did he take photos?" "He took my information, sir. He was very calm about it. He didn't yell." "Don't let that fool you," Miller said, his tone turning serious. "These Hollywood types, they have lawyers for everything. He probably went straight to his people. You need to write this up perfectly, David. Every detail. Don't leave anything out. If internal affairs gets wind that you were distracted, it's not just the insurance you have to worry about. It's your job." David nodded, taking the paper. "I understand, sir." He walked out of the office and found an empty desk in the corner of the bullpen. He sat down and picked up a pen. He stared at the blank lines. Time of accident, location, weather conditions. He wrote mechanically at first, but as he got to the description of what happened, his hand slowed down. He had to write that he rolled the stop sign. He had to admit that he was distracted. It was humiliating to see his failures written down in black ink. He finished a report and handed it in, then clocked out for the day. He felt drained, like he had just run a marathon without moving an inch. He walked out to his personal car, an old sedan that had seen better days. As he drove home, the streetlights flickered on, illuminating the darkening road. All he could think about was what Sergeant Miller had said. He probably went straight to his people. David imagined a team of angry lawyers in a high-rise office building, looking at the police report and laughing. He imagined a lawsuit draining his savings. He imagined the headlines in the gossip blogs. Cop smashes star's car. When he pulled into his driveway, the house was dark except for a soft light coming from the living room window. David sat in the car for a moment, collecting himself. He didn't want his family to see him like this. He didn't want to worry them. He walked inside, the quiet of the house wrapping around him. His teenage daughter, Chloe, was sitting at the kitchen table, a textbook open in front of her. She looked up when he walked in. Her expression was guarded, a reminder of their argument that morning. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, honey," David replied, his voice rough. He walked over to the fridge and poured himself a glass of water. He leaned against the counter, looking at her. She looked so much like her mother. She was smart and sensitive, and he had been too hard on her earlier. "Is everything okay?" Chloe asked, closing her book. "You look like you saw a ghost." David forced a smile. "Just a long day, sweetie. I made a mistake at work. It's going to be okay, but it's just a lot to deal with." He wanted to tell her the truth. He wanted to say, "I smashed Keanu Reeves' car because I was worrying about money, and now I might lose my job, and I feel like a failure." But the words caught in his throat. He was a father. He was supposed to be the rock. He wasn't supposed to dump his problems on his daughter. "Did you eat?" he asked instead. "Not yet." "I'll make us some sandwiches." They ate in a comfortable silence, but David's mind was racing. He watched Chloe eating, thinking about how short-tempered he had been that morning when she asked for money for the trip. She hadn't asked for much, just a little help to have fun with her friends. And he had snapped at her because of his own stress. Then he thought about Keanu. The man had thousands of dollars of damage done to his car by a stranger, and his first reaction was to ask if the stranger was hurt. He didn't care about the money. He cared about the person. David felt a sharp pang of guilt in his chest. He was a police officer. He swore an oath to protect and to serve. But lately, he felt like he was just surviving. He was moving through life with his head down, grumbling at the world, taking out his stress on the people he loved the most. Keanu Reeves, a man he had never met, had shown him more kindness in 5 minutes than David had shown himself or his family in months. After dinner, David went to his bedroom. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. He just sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the digital clock on the nightstand. The red numbers changed slowly. 8 p.m., 8:05 p.m. He was waiting for the phone to ring. He expected it to be the station, or maybe an insurance agent, or worse. The silence in the room was loud. Every time a car drove past the house, his heart jumped. He lay down, staring up at the ceiling. He replayed the scene at the intersection one last time. He saw Keanu standing there in his simple jacket, looking at the smashed metal with such calmness. "It's just metal." David turned onto his side, curling up slightly. He realized that the fear wasn't really about the lawsuit or the job. Those were scary, yes. But the real fear was that he felt he didn't deserve that kindness. He felt like a fraud who had been exposed, and instead of being punished, he had been let off the hook. And that grace, that unexpected mercy, was harder to accept than anger ever was. The house settled into the deep silence of the night. David closed his eyes, but sleep felt miles away. The 24 hours weren't up yet. He had a feeling that the change Keanu had sparked in him was only just beginning. But tonight, all he could feel was a heavy weight of his own waiting heart. The house was completely quiet, the kind of silence that only happens deep in the middle of the night. David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where the shadows from the streetlight outside stretched across the plaster. He had been lying there for 3 hours, but sleep felt impossible. His mind was a busy highway of thoughts, zooming around in circles without stopping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of the Porsche's taillight crunching under his bumper. He heard the sound of metal twisting. But mostly he saw Keanu's face. It wasn't the face of a man who was angry. It was the face of a man who looked concerned. That look kept David awake more than the fear of losing his job did. He turned onto his side, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. He checked his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room, blinding him for a second. No messages, no missed calls. He had expected his phone to ring by now. He expected the station to call, or an insurance agent, or maybe some lawyer from a fancy office in Beverly Hills. He was waiting for the shoe to drop. In his experience, when something bad happened, the punishment usually followed quickly. It was the natural order of the world. Action, reaction, cause, effect. But the reaction wasn't coming. The silence was loud. It was ringing in his ears. David sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. He couldn't just lie here anymore. He stood up and walked out of the room, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake Chloe. He didn't open a heavy door. He just stepped through the open archway into the hallway. The floor was cool under his bare feet. He walked to the kitchen at the end of the hall. The moonlight was streaming through the window above the sink, casting a pale blue glow on the countertops. He saw the stack of mail he had brought in 2 days ago, but hadn't opened. He knew what was in there. Bills, red letters, final notices. He walked over and picked up the envelope on top. It was from the electric company. He held it in his hand, feeling the thin paper. This was his life, a constant cycle of working hard, trying to do the right thing, and never quite getting ahead. He was tired. He was so incredibly tired of being tired. He leaned back against the counter and thought about the interaction on the street again. He thought about how he had treated Keanu. He had been scared, defensive, ready for a fight. That was his default setting now. Whenever he put on his uniform, he put on a shield. He expected the worst from everyone because he usually saw the worst in people. But Keanu had broken that script without even trying. "It's just metal," the actor had said. David looked at the letter in his hand and then threw it into the trash can. It felt like a small rebellion. He walked over to the refrigerator and opened it, the light inside washing over his face. He took out a bottle of water and drank half of it in one go. He thought about his daughter, Chloe. He thought about the way she looked at him that morning when he yelled about the money. She hadn't been angry. She had been hurt. She had looked at him the same way Keanu looked at the dented car, with a sad acceptance that this was just how things were. And that broke David's heart. He realized then that he had been treating the people he loved like suspects. He was so stressed about his own failures that he was pushing everyone away. He was a peace officer, but he hadn't had any real peace in years. He was just a man wearing a costume, pretending he was in control. David walked out of the kitchen and into the small living room. He sat down on the sofa, which was soft and worn. He looked at the photos on the wall. There was one of him and Chloe at the beach a few years ago. He was smiling in that picture, a real smile that reached his eyes. He barely recognized that man now. That man didn't worry about vintage Porsches or lawsuits. That man was just happy to be building a sandcastle with his kid. "What happened to me?" he whispered into the empty room. He knew the answer. Life had happened. The city had chipped away at him, piece by piece. The divorce, the mortgage, the long hours, the things he'd seen on the job. They had all piled up on top of him until he couldn't breathe. He had become hard. He had become the kind of person who rolled through stop signs because he was too distracted to care. And then Keanu Reeves had stepped into that mess and treated him like a human being. That was the part that confused David the most. Why be kind to a guy who just smashed your car? Why offer comfort to the person who caused the problem? It didn't make sense in the world David lived in. In his world, you paid for your mistakes. You suffered, but Keanu had offered him grace. Unearned, undeserved grace. David put his head in his hands. He felt a sting in his eyes, a moisture that hadn't been there in a long time. He wasn't crying because he was sad, and he wasn't crying because he was scared of the consequences. He was crying because he felt unworthy of that kindness. He felt like he had been handed a gift he didn't know how to accept. He sat there for a long time, watching the moonlight move slowly across the floor. He wasn't checking his phone anymore. He wasn't listening for the sound of the siren outside. He was just sitting with his own thoughts, letting them settle. He realized that the accident wasn't the worst thing that happened today. The worst thing was the way he had been living his life before the accident. The crash was just a wake-up call. It was a loud, physical crash that mirrored the quiet, internal crash he'd been suffering through for years. The sun would be coming up soon. In a few hours, the city would wake up. The noise would start again. The cars would honk. The people would rush. And the problems would come back. But David felt different. He didn't feel fixed. He knew he wasn't fixed overnight. But he felt awake. He stood up from the sofa and stretched his back. He walked back down the hallway toward his room. He paused outside Chloe's door. It was slightly ajar, leaving a gap of darkness. He wanted to go in and wake her up, to hug her and tell her he was sorry, to tell her he would find a way to pay for the trip. But he didn't. He didn't want to scare her. He would do it in the morning. Instead, he just stood there for a moment, listening to her breathing. It was steady and calm. She was at peace. That was what he wanted for her. And to give her peace, he knew he had to find it for himself first. He went back to his room and sat on the edge of the bed again. He looked at the clock. It was almost 5 in the morning. 24 hours ago, he had woken up tired and angry. He had woken up expecting a fight. Now, the fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind. He knew he might still lose his job. He knew the insurance would be a nightmare. But for the first time in a long time, the fear wasn't in charge. The kindness was. David took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool morning air. He lay back down and pulled the blanket up to his chin. He closed his eyes, and this time the image of the dented car faded away. In its place, he saw a simple question. Are you okay? He wasn't okay yet, but he thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to be. The next morning brought a bright, clear sky. The sun was already high, promising another hot day in the city. David woke up early, before his alarm went off. He hadn't slept much, but he felt a strange sense of clarity. He needed to go back to the scene. It wasn't official duty, and he wasn't on the clock. He just needed to see the corner where his life had seemingly split in two. He wanted to see the spot where the pavement was likely still scarred by the accident. He got dressed in civilian clothes, a pair of jeans and gray t-shirt, and left the house quietly. His daughter was still asleep in her room. He paused by her door for a second, listening to the silence, before walking out to his car. The drive was short. The traffic was light, and the radio was off. He just wanted to hear his own thoughts. When he turned onto the street, his heart rate picked up. He expected to see nothing, just an empty intersection. But as he pulled up to the curb, he saw someone standing there. It was a figure leaning against a metal lamp post on the corner, shaded by a large tree. David parked his car and stepped out. He squinted against the sunlight. It was Keanu. He was standing exactly where they had met the day before. He looked relaxed, wearing a similar jacket to the one he wore yesterday, holding 2 white paper cups. David stood by his car for a moment, stunned. He hadn't expected this. He thought about turning around and getting back in his car. He felt nervous, like a schoolboy called the principal's office. But then Keanu saw him. He didn't wave or shout. He just smiled a small, knowing smile and pushed himself off the lamppost. David walked across the sidewalk. His legs felt heavy. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked, his voice sounding unsure. "Keanu, please," the actor said. He held out one of the paper cups. "I took a guess you might come back. Coffee. Black, right?" David took the cup. It was warm in his hands. "How did you know?" "I saw you drinking it yesterday at the scene. You looked like you needed it then, too." Keanu gestured toward a low concrete bench that sat under the tree, a few feet away from the road. It was a simple bench, worn smooth by years of people sitting there. They sat down side by side. For a minute, neither of them spoke. They just watched the cars driving past. Nobody recognized the actor, or if they did, they were polite enough to keep driving. "I came to apologize again," David said, staring into his cup. "I felt terrible leaving you there yesterday. I should have waited for the tow truck." "I handled it," Keanu said calmly. "The car is gone. It's in a shop now. They say it will take months to fix the bodywork. But the engine is fine. That's the important part." "I'm glad," David said. He took a sip of the coffee. It tasted good. "I was up all night thinking about it. I was waiting for the phone to ring. I thought you'd call a lawyer or the station." "I could have," Keanu admitted. He turned to look at David. "But I saw your face yesterday. You looked like a man carrying a mountain on his back. I didn't want to add more weight to it." Something inside David cracked. He had been holding himself together with professional stiffness for so long. But this simple observation undid him. He looked down at the concrete ground, blinking rapidly. "I am tired," David whispered. "I am so tired, Keanu. I didn't mean to hit your car. I looked away for 1 second. I was thinking about my bills. I was thinking about how I can't afford to send my daughter on a school trip. I was thinking about how lonely I am since my wife left. And in that 1 second of thinking about myself, I messed up." He stopped, expecting Keanu to interrupt, to judge him. But Keanu just sat there, listening with his full attention. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at his watch. He just listened. David took a deep breath and continued, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "I used to love being a cop. I wanted to help people. But lately, I feel like I'm just a tax collector with a gun. I go to work, and everyone hates me until they need me. Then I come home, and I'm too tired to talk to my kid. I snap at her because I'm stressed. I feel like I'm failing at everything. And then yesterday I failed at my job, too. He put his face in his hands for a moment, ashamed to be crying in front of a stranger, especially the stranger. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be dumping this on you. You're the victim here. Keanu gently reached out and tapped David on the shoulder. Hey, look at me. David lowered his hands. Keanu's eyes were kind, but they were serious too. You're right. You made a mistake, Keanu said. You smashed my car. That's a fact. But that doesn't mean you are a mistake. You said you feel like you're failing. But you're here, aren't you? You came back. You're owning up to it. A man who is truly failing wouldn't care. He would have run away. I just wish I could fix it, David said. All of it. The car, my job, my relationship with my daughter. You can't fix the metal by wishing, Keanu said. The mechanics have to fix the car, but you can fix the other stuff. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be slow work. It's going to be like sanding down rust. Keanu looked out the street, watching a bus drive by. I've lost things in my life, he said softly. Things that can never be fixed or replaced. People I loved. I know what it feels like to have the world go dark. I know what it feels like to not want to get out of bed. The only thing that pulls you out is deciding to take one step. Just one. Then another. You don't fix your life in one day. You fix it by being kind to yourself today. David looked at the man sitting next to him. The world saw a movie star, a wealthy celebrity. But sitting on this concrete bench, David saw a fellow traveler who had walked through deep valleys. The advice wasn't about money or fame. It was about survival. It was about grace. You hit my car, Keanu repeated, turning back to David with a faint smile. It's annoying. It's inconvenient. But it's just metal. It's temporary. The relationship with your daughter? That's permanent. That's the real thing. Don't let a car accident be the thing that breaks you. Let it be the thing that wakes you up. David sat with that for a moment. He thought about Chloe. He thought about the way she looked at him. He realized he'd been focusing on the dent in the Porsche, but he had been ignoring the dent in his own heart. What do I do now? David asked. Finish your coffee, Keanu said. Go home. Wake up your daughter. Tell her you love her. Tell her you're sorry for being stressed. And then tomorrow, go to work and keep your head up. You're a good man, David. You just got lost for a while. We all get lost. David finished his coffee. It was empty now, just like he felt, but somehow lighter. He stood up. Keanu stood up too. Thank you, David said. He meant it more than he had ever thanked anyone. For the coffee, and for not screaming at me. Keanu laughed, a short, genuine sound. I save my screaming for movies. Take care of yourself, officer. You too, Keanu. David walked back to his car. He didn't look back at the bench. He didn't need to. He could feel the change happening inside him. The anxiety was still there, buzzing in the background, but the panic was gone. He got into his car and started the engine. He had a drive home, and he had a daughter to wake up, and for the first time in a long time, he knew exactly what to say to her. The drive back home felt different. The city was the same. The same tall buildings reached up into the blue sky, and the same traffic clogged the streets, but the world looked sharper to David now, as if someone had wiped a layer of grime off his sunglasses. He gripped the steering wheel, but the knot of anxiety that usually lived in his chest was loosening. He didn't feel the urge to check his phone for missed calls from angry lawyers or his boss. He just drove. When he pulled into the driveway, the mid-morning sun was reflecting off the windows of the house. He sat in the car for a moment, looking at the front entrance. It was just a house, but it felt different too. It wasn't just a place where he slept and worried about money. It was where his daughter was. He walked inside, leaving his shoes by the mat. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the lonely silence of the early morning. It was a peaceful silence. He walked down the hallway and stopped in front of Chloe's room. The door was slightly open, just a crack. He pushed it gently. It swung open silently on its hinges. Chloe was sitting at her desk, her back to him. She had her headphones on, and she was typing on her laptop. David stood in the doorway for a second, watching her. He realized he didn't know what she was listening to. He didn't know what she was working on. He had been so wrapped up in his own misery that he had stopped being curious about her life. He knocked lightly on the frame. Chloe jumped and pulled off her headphones. When she saw him, her guard went up immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned around in her chair, waiting for him to complain about something. "Hey," David said softly. He didn't shout. He didn't look angry. "Can I come in for a second?" Chloe nodded slowly, her eyes wary. "Sure." David walked in and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was messy, with clothes piled on the chair and books scattered on the floor. But he didn't mind. He looked at her face. She looked so tired, and he knew he was a reason why. "I wanted to apologize," David started. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "For this morning, and for the last few months, actually, I haven't been myself. I've been stressed and scared, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. You didn't do anything wrong." Chloe bit her lip, looking down at her hands. "It's okay, Dad. I know work is hard." "It's not okay," David said firmly but gently. "I don't want to be the dad you're afraid to talk to. I want to be the dad you come to when you need help. About the trip, I don't know how I'm going to make the math work yet, but we will figure it out. I want you to go. I want you to have fun with your friends." Chloe looked up, and her eyes were shining with tears. "Really? You're not just saying that." "I'm really saying it," David smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "I had a rough day yesterday. I made a big mistake. But someone reminded me today that people are more important than problems. You are the most important person to me, Chloe. I'm sorry I forgot that for a while." She stood up and walked over to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and David held her tight. He realized he hadn't hugged her like this in a long time. Just a simple hug, with no agenda, no lecture, just love. They stood there for a long time. The stress of the bills and the crash didn't disappear, but it suddenly felt manageable. It felt like background noise instead of a screaming siren. Later that afternoon, David went back to work. He had to finish his shift. As he walked out to the patrol car, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky. He put his gear on and got behind the wheel. The car smelled familiar, like stale coffee and vinyl. He looked at the passenger seat. In his mind, he could still see Keanu sitting there, calm and collected. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He picked up the radio microphone. "Unit 412 back in service," he said. His voice sounded steady. 10 minutes later, the radio crackled. "Unit 412, we have a noise complaint at the apartment complex on 5th Street. Neighbor says music is too loud." David sighed. This was the kind of call he hated. It was usually messy and people were rude. The old David would have driven there fast, annoyed that he had to deal with something so trivial. He would bang on the door and demanded the CID. He would have looked for a reason to write a ticket. But today, he took a breath. He remembered Keanu asking, "Are you okay?" He remembered the advice to be kind. He drove to the apartment complex slowly. He parked and walked up the stairs to the 2nd floor. The bass from the music was thumping through the walls, vibrating the floor under his boots. He could hear an angry voice shouting from the apartment next door. David knocked on the door where the music was coming from. He waited. He didn't pound on it. He just knocked firmly. The door opened. A young man stood there, shirtless, looking defensive. His eyes were red, and he looked like he was ready for a fight. "What? I didn't do anything," the guy snapped. David looked at him. He didn't see a criminal. He saw a kid who was probably stressed, maybe lonely, just like David had been. "Hi," David said, keeping his voice low and calm. "I'm Officer Carter. We got a call about the noise. I'm not here to shut you down or ruin your night. I just need you to lower it a bit so your neighbors can relax." The young man blinked, surprised by the tone. He had expected a lecture. He crossed his arms, but his shoulders dropped an inch. "Yeah, okay. I didn't realize it was that loud. My girlfriend just broke up with me, and I was just listening to music." David nodded. "I hear you. We all have those days. Just turn it down a touch, and we're good. No tickets, no trouble." The guy looked at David for a second, then actually smiled a little. "Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll turn it down." Take care of yourself, David said. He walked back down the stairs. The neighbor who had complained opened her door, looking ready to yell. David just gave her a thumbs up. It's handled. Have a good evening. He got back into his cruiser and sat there for a moment. He looked out the windshield at the city lights flickering on as the sun set. The sky was turning a deep purple. Everything had changed. 24 hours ago, he had been a man driving through a red light, distracted by his own darkness. He had hit a car, and in doing so, he had collided with a moment of grace that stopped him in his tracks. The Porsche was still in the shop. The bills were still on the kitchen counter. The world hadn't magically fixed itself because of a conversation. But David was different. The fear that had been driving him was gone. He realized that being a police officer wasn't about carrying a gun or having authority over people. It was about service. It was about seeing people, even the ones playing loud music or the ones who make mistakes, and treating them with dignity. He put the car in drive. He thought about Keanu's words, asterisk just one step. Then another, asterisk David took a step. He would go home after his shift and cook dinner for Chloe. He would listen to her. He would be patient. He pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting for the next disaster. He was just driving, ready for whatever the road held, knowing that no matter what happened, he could handle it with kindness. The heavy weight was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady strength. He was back,